Well, joining us now with his extensive foreign policy experience is former National Security Advisor for President Trump, John Bolton. He's joining us by phone. Mr. Bolton, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. President Biden started his comments today by saying this was all set in motion by President Trump back in May because he'd set that deadline, which is true, but then he went on to validate our retreat by blaming this all on the Afghan government. Would you say that that's an accurate assessment?
No, I think I was very distressed by that speech. While the president did say the buck stops with him, which he, of course, has to say, it was really a very defensive speech, as you say, pointing fingers at the Afghan people themselves, pointing fingers at Trump, and not really taking responsibility. So I don't think it's going to rescue him from the growing concern the American people have over this decision, and may well have set him back.
Just last week, President Biden said that we would not see people being airlifted off roofs, that it would not be a Saigon moment. He said the likelihood that there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the country is highly unlikely. So how did he get this so wrong?
Well, two possibilities. One is there was a fundamental intelligence failure. The other is that he and his top advisors suffer from congenital wishful thinking, or probably some combination. I think we're going to have congressional hearings. We should have congressional hearings about what went wrong with the intelligence. But look, Biden has had the understanding of what our presence in Afghanistan was about wrong for close to 20 years now. And in that sense, he doesn't yet understand that we were there for a very important strategic reason, which is to protect against terrorist attacks in this country. A lot of people have the impression we were there to do charity for the Afghan people. Some people even thought that was the reason. It never was. It was to protect American citizens, and we are now much more vulnerable today than we were before this decision.
We talked about it earlier. You mentioned it, right, that the president was blaming this predominantly on the Afghan government. Yeah, I said it at the top of the show that in Texas we have a saying, don't put blinkers on things you don't want people to see. We put a blinker on this. I mean, we pretty much told the whole world now for a while that we were going to be leaving, specifically the Taliban. Were they just lying in wait? Is that your opinion?
Of course, that's exactly right. The Taliban years ago told us they had a saying, you have the watches, we have the time. There are really two issues here. Number one, was it a correct decision to leave? And second, was that decision implemented effectively? The decision to leave was a decision shared by Trump and Biden. Both of them have felt for some time they wanted out. And in that sense, there are two sides of the same coin. The execution of the decision, however, rests entirely with Biden. And it has proven to be a catastrophe. And it has an effect not just on what happens in Afghanistan. This calls into question American resolve and American competence around the world. I think Biden internationally has done himself a great deal of harm, and I suspect we will see in the coming days that it will have a negative effect on him politically in this country as well.
You brought it up, and so I want to kind of dive into it a little bit. You mentioned that the battle was being fought over there. Do you think that this puts our soil here in harm's way, that puts our citizens here in harm because of the way that we've vacated Afghanistan, the Taliban's marched right back in?
Yeah, I think it comes in stages. The first stage is essentially already finished. The Taliban have taken control effectively of the whole country. The next stage is whether al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other terrorist groups are given sanctuary there by the Afghans. Now, Trump believed that wouldn't happen because Taliban had committed that they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't return to their pre-9/11 behavior. I don't believe them. I don't see how you can believe a group that uses dishonesty, in effect, as a tool of war. So we can't know with certainty, but I think the odds are very substantial that terrorists who do plan international attacks like ISIS and al-Qaeda will return. And then that brings us potentially to stage three, that those groups use these sanctuaries as rear base areas, and as al-Qaeda did before 9/11, again began to plot terrorist attacks. That's what worries me. That's the fundamental interest that the United States and its allies have had in being in Afghanistan these last 20 years. It's better to engage in what the British named a long time ago forward defense, defending ourselves against the terrorists in Afghanistan, rather than waiting to defend ourselves in the streets and skies above America.
Yeah, I've got two-part question to that. So, right, I mean, we've left. The Taliban is in. Two parts to this. First, were we naive to trust that the Afghan army was going to be able to stem them off? And then second, if we were, and it sounded like based on President Biden's speech today, he was pretty assured that eventually this was going to be the outcome. Why in the world did we leave them all of our equipment then to now fall into the Taliban's hands?
Well, I think this is part of the misimpression that has guided a lot of America's actions over the past 15 years or so, ever since the initial victory, and that is that we would make the Taliban worry about the Afghan army as our first line of defense, and I don't think that was ever possible. You don't cede your own security to some foreign army, no matter how close it is. We wouldn't even do that with the British Army, let alone the Afghan army. But the reason for the collapse in just the past few days was the sure knowledge within the Afghan army that we were leaving, and that our Air Force was going, our intelligence capability was going, our logistics capability was going. You know, when you take the keystone out of an arch, the arch collapses, and that's what happened here.
President Biden today said that we should focus on greater threats to the U.S., and he said, I believe it was immediate. Is Afghanistan no longer a threat, or maybe is it just not an immediate threat to the U.S.?
Well, it's not a threat tomorrow or in the next 30 days, but as these terrorist groups reemerge, I think it will become a threat. And I think there's a larger component to this as well. If I were sitting in Beijing or Moscow, I would be licking my chops at the chance to take on the United States in some other crisis. They've seen here weakness and incompetence that cheers them up and gives them reason to think they can extract more concessions from the Biden administration. I would say the same is true in Tehran and Pyongyang and in other capitals that don't have our best interest at heart. This is a very bad couple of days for the United States, for its credibility around the world.
Yeah, you just mentioned it. Does this? And that was going to be my next question: is where does this leave us? Maybe with our adversaries, but what about with our allies? Is our position weakened with our allies as well?
Yeah, the British were basically not told by Biden that he was going to pull out American forces. Now, this is the man and the administration that said, America's back, we believe in our alliances, we're competent, we're professional, and they've carried this out in a way which has offended many in the NATO alliance who weren't enthusiastic about being in Afghanistan, but saw it as an important thing to do. And we just up and said we're leaving, and it meant the NATO forces had to go as well. If you're Taiwan, you're very worried about this today. When America got tired, they just left the Afghans to themselves. And I think other allies, the Gulf Arab states, even close allies like Israel, have to be worried about what this kind of cavalier attitude on Biden's part may mean for them.
Ambassador Bolton, we certainly appreciate your take this afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.